This game is rated M and is built on crude, mostly sexual humor. I'm not even gonna try to bother censoring everything. I've restrained the video to what I'm allowed to show on YouTube, but otherwise, if you don't want to see any of that, consider this your warning. Let me ask you something, because I'm gonna cut straight to the chase here. You get a prompt like,
where would you orally pleasure the Eiffel Tower?
Now, I'm not trying to be facetious here. This is a genuine question. Is this funny to you? When you're still getting prompts like this half an hour later, will this still be funny to you? If you said yes to both, then honestly, I would just go ahead and buy the naughty pack right now. If you don't think you'll ever get tired of seeing prompts like this, then you'll probably like all three games here. If you said no, well, here's the rest of the review. I don't want to come off as arrogant here, but I'm not ignorant to the influence I have on the Jackbox community. I've had numerous people tell me I've introduced them to the series, and my videos will pop up if you literally just Google Jackbox. This isn't me bragging, because the reality is, who gives a damn? Everyone has their niche, right? At the end of the day, I'm just a guy, and a number next to my name doesn't make my opinion any more valid than anyone else's. The reason I even bring this up is because from the start, I had my reservations with an M-rated Jackbox, and I didn't want to influence the perception of this pack because I was really curious about this one, or rather how people would respond to it. This is something that could either be a huge success or a huge mistake, but if it is a huge success, it could potentially shape the future of the company, and I didn't want to interfere with that outcome if that's what people actually wanted. After all, it's not fair to anyone when someone doesn't like a thing just because some bullshit I said, so I didn't say anything. Not on Steam or social media anyway. Checking in 1 week later without the guilt that I might be swaying public perception, and things are looking pretty rough. I figured the pack might be controversial, but mostly negative on Steam? I'm obviously an opinionated guy, and believe me, we'll definitely be getting into some critiques. But mostly negative? Even I think that's harsh. But let's be real here. From concept alone, Jackbox is fighting an uphill battle. So I've made a Venn diagram here for you all, very scientific of course, to illustrate my point. On the left, we have socially acceptable jokes, you know, puns, physical humor such as slapstick, cats. Then on the right, we have the adult humor, jokes about politics, religion, race, gender, tragic events. If you're a company that wants to make sure you don't offend anyone, and by anyone I mean social media, this is basically the no-no stuff. The center here are jokes that are both for adults, but are still socially acceptable. If your aim is to make an adult comedy game, rated M in this case, that people won't come after you for, this is what you have to work with. Basically nothing. I mean, it's not like they're gonna make 9/11 jokes or something, so right out the gates, the Naughty Pack is positioning itself as a Jackbox title of an oversaturation of sex jokes. The reason it's such a hard pitch is because the strength of Jackbox has always been the ability to adhere to the sensibilities of your friend group. If the only thing you and your friends think is funny are answers about cum, then you could already do that. Besides, it's not like Jackbox games are made for kids. They're rated T. Sure, there's always been optional family-friendly filters so you could broaden the demographics to literally anyone, but the games have never shied away from questions about sex, drugs, pop culture. I mean, even a game as dunked on as Lice Water would ask you true or false questions such as,
Charles Dickens founded a school for former prostitutes.
Which is apparently true, by the way. The irony is that by making the focal point of the pack centered around sexual humor, I feel the pack is actually inhibiting itself more than it is catering itself to adults. But hey, the team has made Stranger Ideas work, and despite my reservations, it's not exactly an idea doomed to fail, so let's see what they got. Starting with Fakin' It All Night Long, the sequel to Fakin' It all the way back from Party Pack 3, and I gotta say, it's great to see it return given it's always been a favorite amongst my friends. You and up to 7 others. Yeah, this game finally supports 8 players opposed to the original 6, are all given prompts like,
raise your hand if you've ever cooked naked.
1 player is randomly selected to be the faker every round and doesn't get anything, needing to blend in. That's basically the whole game right there. 1 player is trying to blend in, and everyone else is trying to find out who's lying out their ass because they didn't get a prompt. As a social deduction game, Fakin' It has always had 2 major strengths. It's super easy to understand, and it's low stress. Being the outlier and even something like Among Us can be a lot of pressure. Pressure I find doesn't really exist in Fakin' It since who the faker is constantly changes. So, cool, it's the same game loop people fell in love with 7 years ago, but does this sequel bring anything new to the table? Yeah, a lot actually. The big one is that you can play remotely now. The intention with the original is that everyone would get together and play from the same room. There were ways to play around this if you want to play over Discord, such as typing the name of the person you're pointing to, for example. But now that it's actually built into the game, the online playing experience is just as seamless as any other modern Jackbox title. This feature alone gives it a huge leg up over the original, especially because the original playstyle is still provided if you're all in person and want to play it the old way. And if you do choose to play the old way, they provide some creative, in-person only takes on the prompts. Like in the You Got a Point category, you might get something like,
point to a part of your body that someone should make a statue of.
Most of them probably could have been supported in the remote play version with some extra work, but the fact they included prompts like that at all is a nice touch. Oh, and likely to accommodate the larger player count, the vote no longer needs to be unanimous to catch the faker. As long as a majority of people are on the same page, you got them. Honestly, even when you're not playing with a full group of 8, this is a smart change regardless. Face value, probably the weakest category in the original, got revamped into an emoji category, where you submit an emoji to the question being asked of you. Despite the faker getting a vague hint, I think the odds are slightly stacked against them since they have access to every single emoji, but I still greatly prefer it to the original category. It's a fun update. There's a new round category called Thumb Shot. It will have all 3 questions of the round follow a single grouping like Smash or Pass, providing 3 things you need to respond with using a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Then instead of having the players try to guess the faker after every question, everyone only has a single chance to guess who it is after seeing the responses to all 3. As a minor critique, I don't like how it doesn't tell you everyone's responses at the end, especially if you're only going to get one shot to catch a faker. In smaller groups, this isn't a huge deal since it's easy enough to remember, but if you're playing with a max group size of 8, that's 24 responses you need to remember, 3 for each player. Again though, that's pretty minor, and overall, I like the addition of this category. Something I gotta mention that kind of fucked with me, especially in larger groups, is how the you got a point round is now visualized. So in person, you'll get something like, point at the person most likely to bang a World War II veteran, and then you just point to whoever. Simple enough. But how do you represent that when playing remotely? Well, their solution is initially a pretty elegant one. Check this out. Super clean and legible. It shows everyone that was pointed to and who it was that pointed. Nothing superfluous is shown, everything is condensed into this one simple screen. Is perfect. Then because fuck you, this happens. It goes to a completely separate screen, and mind you, this is exactly the same question in everything. No additional information is being provided. It's just being presented in a more convoluted way. And yeah, I do get that this second screen is more in line with the response screens for the other round categories, but I don't even understand the point of making a unique screen at all if it's just going to switch back to the standard one, other than disorienting the player, I guess. Got a few of my friends and certainly got me. I've never felt so mindfucked while completely sober. Despite liking the formatting of the first screen more, again, I do think it's more immediately clear what you're looking at, which I imagine is why they made it in the first place. I think I would have preferred to not have this screen at all if all it ends up doing is showing the same information twice. It just makes it more confusing than anything. Another bizarre design choice is it not letting you know that you're the faker during the final round that has you typing all your answers. You'll type in your 3 responses, and then after they're already submitted, that's when the game will tell you, oh hey, by the way, you're the faker this round. Meaning that, hey, those 3 answers you just gave, those were actually answers to 3 questions you haven't even seen yet. I suppose the idea is that you want to be as vague as possible in the event that you are the faker, but to my knowledge, the game does not tell you this beforehand, which really fucked me and many of my friends over the first time playing. The thing that made the text you up round so fun in the original is that you were told you were the faker, because from there it was this balancing act between trying to make your answer vague enough so it could fit a variety of questions, but not too vague as to give yourself away. You had to be careful about what you submitted, which made it all the more satisfying when you actually did get away with your fake answer. To give the new final round some credit, I really like how they play out all 3 questions and only give you a single shot to catch the faker during the last one. One of the most amusing parts of the final round has always been seeing the difference between the real prompt and the faker prompt, but the original would only show you the differences for the prompts it actually presented, meaning that if you caught the faker on question 1, you only got to see the first set of answers. It goes through all 3 no matter what now, which I think was for the better, especially since it gives the faker a shot to potentially redeem themselves in the event that only their first answer was suspicious. Some critiques here and there, but overall this is, for the most part, the blatantly better version of Fakin' It. I played all 3 games in this pack of 5 completely different groups of people from all corners of my life, and this was the game that everyone enjoyed. I actually have more recordings for this game than the other 2 games combined, because it was always the one people wanted to replay. In fact, I'd say that this is the best sequel they've done since Trivia Murder Party 2. However, there is one last critique I've yet to mention, and unfortunately it's my biggest one by far: the prompts. There is only one game in this pack that I think justifies its existence as being a part of this pack specifically, and unfortunately Fakin' It All Night Long is not that game. I mean, sure, the animations are blatantly sexual for the sake of being sexual, but that doesn't interfere with the gameplay, so I don't mind. And yeah, a lot of the prompts try way too hard to be edgy, which will probably limit you to a very specific friend group you can comfortably play this with. An issue I have with this pack as a whole, but I also have a few friend groups I can play this with without getting uncomfortable, so it's also whatever. No, the problem I have is that as a social deduction game, forcibly trying to make every prompt adult in nature, specifically the fact that they are all mostly sexual, strips, pun not intended, the game of the variety it should have. It makes it too obvious to the faker what they should be doing in nearly every situation. Let me give you an example. Here's some of the hands of truth prompts I've seen. Raise your hand if you've ever masturbated to the sound of your roommate having sex. Raise your hand if there's a sports player out there that makes your vulva throb. Raise your hand if you would totes fuck a vampire. They actually use the word totes. Raise your hand if you've ever played an erotic video game. Raise your hand if you've ever inserted an alcohol-soaked tampon anywhere in your body. Do you see a problem with this set of questions? Unless you're so unremarkable that your only defining character trait is being horny, something that literally anyone can be, it's too easy to just not raise your hand as the faker and let others take attention away from you by having conversations of, "What? You've done that?" Even if you're really close to someone. Most of these are so personal that not even a partner would know whether or not you're lying. If you get a question like, raise your hand if you think it's okay to masturbate at an in-law's house, even if you think that it is, it's easier to lie about why your hand is down than it is to explain yourself for having your hand being up, even if that's the truth. Lying should not be as easy as going like, yeah, never done that, and leaving it there. But if most all prompts are sexual in nature, and people don't view you as a complete and utter degenerate, then that's all you have to say for most of the prompts in this game. In the original, it wasn't uncommon to get something like, raise your hand if you have a food allergy, or raise your hand if you like games. You know, questions that are not only suspicious if you don't raise your hand, but questions that are likewise more public, and therefore require a more convincing lie than just, nah. Even the dirty questions in the original are harder to lie about, like, raise your hand if a significant other has watched you pee, which if you've dated someone for just a year, is a lot harder to lie about if your hand is down, especially if the person you're with is also in that game playing, which to me should be the whole idea. From premise alone, in the hands raised category, the faker should hypothetically be getting a 50-50 shot in the dark to submit an answer that would actually be their real answer. Those are already pretty good odds for a shot in the dark, so for that other 50%, they'll need a lie. The game should be pushing for the faker to lie as much as possible. After all, that's not only what makes a good social deduction game, but that's also what makes memorable game nights. When every prompt is dirty and you can just coast by a whole game by never raising your hand, the game isn't asking you to do anything. Not only does that make it too easy for the faker, but it also makes it less interesting for the whole group. I have actually yet to see a single hands of truth prompt where not raising would be suspicious. That's not to say they don't exist in the game, I'm sure they do, but considering I've played the new Fakin' It more times than the other two games combined, you would think I would have seen one by now. Having multiple topics and generally just a larger variety of questions in the original Fakin' It made it harder to spot patterns, which in turn made the game more interesting because you couldn't immediately find out who was or wasn't lying purely based on previous questions. It's like if in the original, every question was about pets, you'd very quickly understand everyone's general opinion on them, making their answers more predictable, thus easier to know who did or didn't get a prompt. That would be dumb, right? Kinda takes a lot of fun out of the game. We'll swap out pet prompts with horny prompts, and that is unfortunately exactly what happened. This logic basically applies to every category. For you got a point, always point to the craziest or horniest person. For number pressure, always do a low number. The only categories that don't always succumb to this problem is the final round, since you have to type something specific. In the emoji category, which has the opposite problem since, as already stated, it's actually too hard for the faker. Although even the emoji category still slightly has a sex theme problem, where for a lot of these, you could probably slip under the radar by always picking an emoji that is at least slightly sexual in nature. There are Jackbox games you can make sound arguments for why having an oversaturation of sex prompts could actually make the game better, but a social deduction game like Fakin' It is not one of them because it makes the game predictable, letting people fall into an obvious and dependable playstyle. If, because of the insisted sex theming, I can get a loose idea of what my excuse for an answer should be before I even see the prompt, then something is terribly wrong. None of this is enough to ruin the game, of course. Like I said, this was the game all my friends wanted to keep playing. It's still a ton of fun, but at the same time, I have to ask why this was chosen over other games for the Naughty Pack specifically. Fakin' It, the original, already had plenty of dirty prompts. Raise your hand if you've ever measured a penis. Name a food that would be erotic to eat off someone. Point at the person who's the biggest pervert. Actually, maybe that one would go against their bottom line, assuming this game's presumed demographic. There was a ping one from earlier. I've seen prompts about masturbation. Again, all the other titles were already rated T, so it's not like this version is pushing any boundaries outside the nudity, which is totally disconnected from the actual gameplay. On that note, let me end this overly long segment with something I think they actually did very well. This game knocks the presentation out of the park. The original already had a fantastic art style. I mean, it inspired the avatar for all my previous Jackbox reviews. It takes that same art style from the original and improves it in basically every conceivable way. The hot tub motif is charming, a scoreboard is visualized by rising martinis, the atomic art style is complemented by similarly retro-looking patterns such as leopard print for the border trim, the soundtrack retains that surfer vibe the original had and sounds just as good if not better, and you can pick your character now. They all have their own unique animations, and the dog in particular is a cool reference reference to the concept art of the original Fakin. It's a bit ironic that the thing holding this game back the most is literally the pack it happens to be included in. This is such an amazing sequel to Fakin', and I would love to be able to play it at family get-togethers. But because of the content that, again, I think only hinders the game, I'm limited on who I can play this otherwise superior sequel with. Even still, if there's any game worth buying the pack for, it's this. Dirty Drawful is exactly what it sounds like. The dirty sequel to Drawful. What's Drawful, I hear exactly one of you ask? Drawful is an 8-player drawing game where you're given a prompt like, using an example from the newest game, clit and brain in heated debate. You draw that to the best of your ability, and then one by one, everyone's doodles are thrown up on the TV. If you didn't draw the thing that's currently on the screen, you try to guess what the title could be, with that guess alongside everyone else's also getting thrown up on the TV. If you pick the correct title to a drawing, you get points. If people pick your lie over the real answer, you get more points. And if you're the artist, you're rewarded for each player that properly guesses your actual prompt. I don't know if I've ever met someone who considered Drawful their favorite Jackbox game, but for what it's worth, I've also never met anyone who hated it either. It's a proven formula. I mean, I like Drawful. Given this is technically Drawful 4, if you could believe that, what does this latest iteration introduce? Well, there's finally a damn undo button, and if you've ever watched any of my Drawful reviews, you could probably guess how ecstatic I was to see that. Especially since I imagine the naughty pack is expected to be played while intoxicated, this was a smart inclusion to save everyone's submissions from being illegible chicken scratches. Alongside an undo button, you can also ask for a new prompt. I wouldn't say it's as much of a necessity considering there probably isn't a single prompt in any Drawful that won't have you wondering how the hell you're gonna draw it, but the gesture is appreciated. In the tradition of every Drawful adding another color, well, here comes color number 4, with every player always having access to black and white. And lastly, you can react to whatever is on the screen with emojis, with the game even replaying which drawing was the most emoted at the end of the game. I personally don't mind the feature, but I've heard people express how annoying they think the emojis and their associated sounds are. You actually get an option to turn off the undo button, but not an option to turn off the emojis. I get turning off the undos and make this iteration of Drawful more in line with the others, but I'm almost positive a way to turn off the emojis would have been the more appreciated setting. And that's basically it. Of course, the prompts themselves are dirty now, but in terms of features, there isn't much here you're missing out on if you already own a Drawful. Even visually, they don't really try anything to make this Drawful stand out from its predecessors. I mean, in the lobby, they stuck long-ass hooker legs on the Drawful owl, but even then, once you start the game, you never see this version of the owl again in favor of the traditional owl design you've already seen in past Drawfuls. Supposedly, the team went for this bathroom stall aesthetic with, I guess the idea being that your drawings are wall graffiti or like unintelligible gibberish you'd see etched inside of a stall, but outside the main menu, it's an aesthetic lost in translation. I mean, are you looking at the screen right now? It all looks really nice. The pastel colors, the rounded font. I can count the number of bathrooms I've entered that have looked this nice on one hand. If they really wanted this Drawful to stand out from the rest, I think a blacklight look reminiscent of something you'd see in a nightclub could have gone a long way. Instead of your traditional white canvas, have a black one with the utensils being neon markers. At least then it would visually stand out from the others. Drawful 2 specifically has been given out for free on at least 2 occasions that I know of. The most recent being a few weeks ago with the release of the Mega Picker. Not only that, but it goes on sale for dirt cheap all the time. It's not uncommon to see Drawful 2 discounted for around $1. Which brings us to the main question of, if you already own a Drawful, which if you're watching this you likely do, then what argument does Dirty Drawful provide to still buy and play it anyway? Initially I was thinking this was the most pointless inclusion in the Naughty Pack, but after giving it some additional thought, I think that, if anything, it's actually the inclusion that makes the most sense. And for 2 reasons. The first is that if you think some of the new prompts are a bit cringy, you can just play Drawful 2 and get virtually the same experience without feeling like you're missing out on too much. At the very least, it's not like Fakin' It, where if you don't like that game's prompts, you're also missing out on a plethora of great additions and changes. I suppose that one is more of a silver lining than anything since it doesn't exactly validate its existence, but this second one does. Since all the prompts are intentionally raunchy, you can enter a vulgar or dirty lie, and it might actually sound like it could be the real prompt. To me, personally, that's not a huge selling point since, I don't know, I feel like I need at least a Quiplash setup or something. I'm not gonna just see the word fuck or penis in an answer and start laughing. Regardless, it is an argument in Dirty Drawful's favor, and I think it's a valid one, so I wanted to mention it. Unfortunately, this also brings us to the argument of custom prompts. In Drawful 2 and Drawful Animate, there was a mode where you and your friends can make a grab bag of user-submitted prompts to then be used in a game of Drawful. Using that mode, the prompts could be anything, meaning that any prompt you see in Dirty Drawful could be put into Drawful 2 or Animate. The only counter-argument to that I could see is that the custom prompt selection is broken up into episodes you make, each of which having a strict limit to how many prompts you can enter. That, and also if you enter prompts, you'll get an unfair advantage since you'll know for a fact what some of them are. If they ever did a Drawful where you can search and download user-submitted episodes, I would say that alone would make Dirty Drawful obsolete. But nothing like that currently exists, so for the meantime, Dirty Drawful at least has its crude, unknown assortment of prompts going for it. Other than in its prompts though, that's really it. Dirty Drawful, unlike the last two entries, doesn't have any extra game modes. It's just the standard Drawful. This returns us to the question they needed to answer, which is, if you already have Drawful 2, what justification does Dirty Drawful provide to buying a near identical version of a game you already own? Which, unfortunately, is a question it doesn't have a confident answer to. If Drawful 2 never existed, then I would say this is the go-to Drawful experience. But Drawful 2 does exist, and it goes on sale all the time. Crude prompts can be funny, but they're not enough to justify this version alone. Both the most questionable inclusion in the pack, yet somehow still the most validated. Dirty Drawful is fun, because it's Drawful, but I don't know who is pining for a near identical version to a game they already own. Lastly, we have Let Me Finish, the one entirely new game of the pack. This is supposedly a debate game, more on that in a bit, where you and another player are given a picture and an associated prompt like,
which of these stoppers recently bought their first sex swing?
The fuck?
You get to draw on the picture to help present your point with not nearly enough time to do so. I really do hope that we'll someday see a Jackbox where you can individually set timers opposed to having blanket adjustments for the whole game. Then you present. All the players vote for what presentation they liked more, and from there, the players that didn't present can choose to jump in and present whatever they might have drawn as well. And that's the entire game. Votes equate to points, and the person with the most points by the end is the winner. I'm gonna try my best to not be a huge asshole here, but damn, this one is rough. I seriously have no idea what happened here. When getting a prompt like, which of these bottles has a favorite cum sock, is that funny? Do people think that's funny? Did the team think that's funny? Or were they trying to branch out and cater to a demographic they don't belong to? I would suspect that maybe I'm too old, but the director for this game, who was also the director of two of my favorite games, Pull Mine and Push the Button by the way, is definitely older than I am. You think of some of their best comedy games. I'm gonna use Quiplash as an easy example since that's the one that everyone loves. And the thing that makes Quiplash a great comedy game is that it gives you an open-ended prompt, cleanly sets the foundation for you, and then lets you, the player, take it from there. This might sound counterintuitive, but in a comedy game, the constraints shouldn't feel constraining. Sure, in a game like Quiplash, you're constrained by the prompt, so to speak. In the nature of the game, you need to abide, or respond to it, but the best prompts should get your mind racing. That's what I mean when I say you shouldn't feel constrained by the constraint. Quiplash is great because so often in that game, you get the prompt, and after thinking about it for a bit, it has you going, oh man, I got a good one for this. But when you get something like,
which of these writing implements has never ever cleaned their fleshlight?
This could be a form of hell. If you just had to play this for eternity.
Was there a good one for that? How blackout drunk do you need to be for some of these prompts to work? Let Me Finish's problem is that in eagerness to try to flex how adult this pack is to its players, most of these prompts are too obsessed of themselves to provide a solid foundation for the player. It's such an insecure game that instead of giving the players a spotlight, it puts a spotlight on itself because it doesn't care about your responses. It wants to be at the start of the show. And sure, if you think that a prompt like, which of these produce the most sperm when they orgasm, is already peak comedy, then you know what? This is your game. But if you're like me and the many people I played with, and your response is something more along the lines of,
It's just a little too vulgar. It doesn't need to be. It's like edgy for the sake of being edgy.
then it's gonna feel like a real uphill battle trying to squeeze out any sort of comedy from these prompts. We felt like it was an unfunny game you had to try really hard to make funny, and it's just not worth the effort. I don't want to act like I'm above immature sex jokes because believe me, I'm not. Many of my previous game nights and other Jackbox titles have devolved into jokes of that nature numerous times.
This is what you masturbate to.
Fear is the only thing keeping you from masturbating.
Very happy with the sex.
But I don't know, while myself and my friends think general sex jokes or masturbation jokes are funny, it's significantly less funny when you get some weird incestual prompt asking you which inanimate object is attracted to their brother. If they want to have prompts asking how players would smear their cum on a lamp or something, then whatever. It's cringy, but whatever. But why the hell would you write a prompt that tries to bait players into making incest jokes? Let's not play dumb about this. If people are actually going to try to work with this prompt, then especially in the nature of this game, that is going to be the natural progression of this question. So if you want to tell me that I need to accept that this game, quote, isn't for me because I can't enjoy a good old classic incest joke like you can, then maybe you're right. Although at that rate, I'd be more concerned about who this game is for. I get that comedy is extremely subjective, so it might seem unfair to dog on this game just because I don't find the prompts funny. Well, me and the 5 different groups of people I played with. But that's just it. comedy is subjective. That's why the best comedy games in Jackbox are the ones that let your group dictate the type of jokes your play session has. It's always funnier when the edgy jokes are a result of your group, not the game. I know I keep doing this, but for real, when you get a prompt like,
Where is this thing's pussy?
Jordan, I can't play this anymore. This sucks.
and your group just immediately finds it cringy, all that's going to happen is they're going to find some other way to entertain themselves. That happened in every game I played, in fact, and ironically, my favorite moments I've had of this game had absolutely nothing to do with the prompts. The things that did end up being funny was when people would blatantly ignore the prompt to instead do something like draw this scary-ass garden hose wiener into every presentation they did, or when someone was asked where they would come on a wardrobe, they just ignored the prompt and instead pretended they were stuck inside it. Actually, if I'm being completely honest, I think my favorite moments were when the presenter was completely apathetic towards the game.
Oh, I'm presenting.
Yeah. 10 seconds.
I'm stuck on that thing like that. I don't know.
Subversions to the game were funny for sure, but they were at the expense of the game instead of being funny as a direct result of it. It's similar to how I felt about Fixie Text, where that was a game that threw its arms in the air and went, type whatever, I don't give a fuck. Like a neglectful babysitter, giving you next to no direction or foundation, then still had the audacity to ask for a raise. I just don't think a game should get undeserved credit just because you think your friends are funny. Something like Quiplash or Job, they have a solid semblance of structure, to the point where, when something is funny, I feel the game itself deserves some credit for setting the players up. But here, the setups and the structure, those of course being the prompts, I think actively work against the game. It throws you a stock photo in a middle school query and then fucks off. The prompts aren't good setups, and the stock photo is just a stock photo. Again, if the biggest laughs had were only because what the game was asking the players was being completely ignored, then does the game itself deserve credit when you have a good time with your friends? To me, that answer is no. Giving a little bit of credit, and again, it had nothing to do with the actual prompts, but doodling on some of these pictures did lead to some amusing moments. Though at that point, you might as well not even have a prompt and just have a slideshow of PNGs people can draw on. Is that even a game though? Not really. You might think it's unfair to give credit to the Quiplash prompts and not the let me finish ones, but really look at these.
Where would you finger this light meter?
Where? What do you mean where? Everyone and their grandma is gonna pick the one and only hole it even has. I can see the query being how, but where? There's nowhere to go with this. Both players are just gonna have the same exact answer and that's it. There's also a surprising lack of variety. I got that pencil fleshlight prompt twice actually, only 2 games apart, which makes me think that there's no script in play to make sure players aren't seeing repeats. But if prompts are going to be as juvenile as to be about pencils not cleaning out their fleshlights, then you wouldn't think that variety would be an issue. That being said, it's not rare to get essentially the same prompt for multiple pictures. Seriously, is an object wearing a strap-on such a killer setup that it needs to be repeated numerous times?
How would this thing? Wear a strap on. Wear a strap on. Use a strap on. How would this thing? Wear a strap on.
That last one doesn't even make for a good prompt because it's a baseball. I mean, not that the others were good, but a baseball is just a sphere. It doesn't have any appendages where people could potentially deviate in their answers. Everyone will just end up having, more or less, the same response. Lineup questions, as in the pictures with multiple objects, are generally the better ones because they don't fall into the issue of both players having the same exact talking point as often. Often, being relative of course, it's not exactly uncommon for both players to pick this same exact object in response to the question. This brings us to the big bullet point here. Even on a surface level, this is not a good presentation game. Because don't get it twisted, that's what this game is, a presentation game. Its structure would have you to believe it's a debate game. After all, it pits 2 players against each other, ideally having each side present a different argument. But the way things actually shake out, as you've probably already gathered from what I've shown you, is both players draw their thing, basically locking them into a standpoint. The first player will tell you how they feel about the prompt of the drawing they did. The second player oftentimes will have chosen the same argument with their drawing likewise locking them into it, and then everyone else decides on who presented that same argument better. There's no real debating that goes on here, which is a shame because a Jackbox game that asks you to be more conscious of what your opponent is saying so that you can challenge the points they made would be a great premise for a game, instead of how it actually is, where you give your presentation as if there isn't even another player you're competing against. By having the players draw on the picture before they even know who their opponent is, the structure itself is discouraging playing things by ear. But playing things by ear, having to shift your bullet points based off what the other person is saying, needing to respond to them directly and challenge them, is the basis of a real debate. So that very basic foundation of what a debate is not being the focal point of let me finish. Again, how could it be when what you drew before even hearing your opponent is thrown on the screen regardless of what they say, is why I wouldn't call this a debate game. This is is a presentation game where you just so happen to have the same topic as someone else. And when you look at it from that lens, all Let Me Finish amounts to is a watered down talking points, which at that point I would just suggest playing that game instead. Every aspect of what makes a good presentation game is done so much better there, especially its comedy aspect. Talking Points is a presentation game that feels like you're taking your group on a journey that twists and weaves in unexpected directions since it's being influenced by another player. Not to mention, being able to choose your starting off point ensures that every player gets to dictate the tone of their presentation and, more importantly, cater things to your group's sensibilities. Let Me Finish is a presentation game where two players are given the same dead-end prompt asking where they'd pee on something, and then struggle for 2 minutes, grasping at straws trying to find any way possible to extract the tiny bit of comedy that exists in such a constrained setup. If this game's aim was truly to be a debate game, which, mind you, I think would make for a fantastic Jackbox game, then what it needed to do is have the prompts directly pit the players against each other. Make the prompts stuff like, your title of World's Best Assassin is being dethroned by your opponent. What makes you the better killer? Right away, you'd immediately be accomplishing 3 things. You're making the debate element intertwined with the prompt, you're giving the player a prompt open enough they could take it in any direction, even a dirty one if they want, and you've likewise given a clear topic to stay within the boundaries of, but not so constrained the player feels they need to ignore the prompt entirely to do something funny. Those are the 3 things every prompt needs if this is really going to be a debate game. Pit the players against each other, define a clear through line of what the debate will be, and don't be so confined as to stick the player in a tiny box of directions that restricts what they can even do with the prompt. Or hell, want to keep it more in line of what's already here? Let's take this prompt. Which of these nuts can suck their own dick? Instead of a single lineup picture both players share, send each player 3 unique nut pictures so that way they can't present the same exact nut, so then there's that problem resolved. Then have player 1's nut on the left and player 2's on the right. It'd make you feel more attached to your selection, because it would be your unique nut. Then from there you'd be like, fuck you, this is why my nut can suck their dick better than the dumbass nut that you picked. Having a picture of a chair and then asking you where it wants you to pee on it is not a good setup for a debate, because best case scenario, assuming you're actually playing by the prompt, is that both of you will hopefully pick 2 separate parts. Then, I mean, okay, you at least establish separate stances you can build a debate on, but there's nowhere to really expand your argument when all you're talking about is where you're peeing. Even from a comedy standpoint, when the prompt is literally, where does this thing want you to pee on it? How many funny things can you realistically derive from that? The last thing I need to touch on is the jump in feature. So during literally any prompt that you were not chosen to present, you can hit a button that lets you jump in and present whatever it is that you drew. There's absolutely no reason to not do this. In fact, you can even get more points by jumping in. I mean, if you could get extra points, why wouldn't you jump in? Even if it's not much, extra points are extra points. After all, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. I think I saw that quote out of Kohl's once, unless you want to make the argument that points don't matter, but if they don't matter, it brings us back to the question of what this game even is. If this is even trying to be a debate game, then winning, or in this case a score system, should absolutely be a fundamental part of it. If winning isn't important, then it's not a debate, it's a conversation. And if it's just a conversation, then what even is this game? Some weird backdoor to get you and your friends to talk about what you'd do if you're cum? So then, since it's free points, everyone is jumping in, and it turns this into a game that takes almost half an hour. Even points aside, don't you want to present the thing the game made you draw? I mean, why have all the players draw if only 2 of them are presenting? For the sake of pacing, wouldn't it make way more sense to only draw on the prompt that you're actually presenting while everyone else does theirs? It's like if in Quiplash they made you respond to every prompt instead of the 2 you'd usually do, and then when it didn't choose you for that prompt matchup, it was like, do you want to show your answer too? Well, no shit you would. If you were made to submit an answer anyway and there's nothing to lose, you'd want to show it. And that's the same with this game. The only real reason I can see someone not wanting to show what they did is if they are so over this game that they just want it to end. But if people aren't engaging with a feature for the sole reasoning of wanting to get through the game faster, that's not the sign of a good game. Not to beat this dead horse further, but this was also the buggiest game of the pack. This prompt had the wrong audio.
Where is this thing's erogenous zone?
This prompt had no audio. This one is more of a mistake than a bug, but this picture of a cactus wasn't even cropped out from the background it belonged to. From what I can tell, this game keys out the white backgrounds to give the visual of an object floating in this empty space, whereas this one is blatantly just a square picture of a cactus with the background fully intact. I don't even understand what happened with this game. Every group I played with genuinely tried to play along. We really did. We gave it a fair shot. It's not like we went in already hating it.
The one on the left, too small. The one on the top, too big. The bottom one, just right, baby.
Let's vote.
It just wasn't funny. Like there. I don't think it was my friend's fault. It just so happened that he got a prompt asking him where a brass instrument's vagina was. I don't blame him, nor anyone else I played this game with. It's one thing when you get a comprehensive setup in a game and then bring it down to its lowest common denominator because you're just fucking around with friends. But when the prompts themselves are the lowest common denominators, well, then what did you even spend 21 bucks on? Even when you're not trying, you want to at least feel like the game is. If you had a great time with your friends and were dying of laughter because the game asked you which chair wanted to be peed on, then honestly, that's awesome. Sometimes I wish I wasn't such a cynic so I could also enjoy things like this. But I can't lie to myself. Look at a line of buckets with the prompt, which one wears cum-stained shorts in public, and force myself to start laughing. I'm sorry, I just don't think it's funny. To even make something like this funny, you would have to deviate so far from the prompt that you might as well not even be given a prompt. If this is the kind of game that resonates with you and your friends, again, I'm happy for you. But I can't imagine a scenario where my friends and I would want to play this over any other presentation game that the Jackbox team has done.
Yeah, Jordan, that one sucked.
A bit awkward ending on such a negative note, but that's the Jackbox Naughty Pack. It's not at all a terrible pack, but its biggest successes are in spite of its M rating, not because of it. I kept having all these moments to myself where I was just like, am I getting too old for Jackbox? But after thinking about it for 5 seconds, I realized, no. If the first Jackbox to make me ask that question is the only one that is literally rated M, then something is very wrong. Yeah, sure, I'm not super young, but I'm not super old either. I mean, this isn't exactly a game for minors. I would imagine the age range this game will resonate with most are kids straight out of high school and or those still under the age of 20. But at that rate, what's the time window to enjoy a game like Let Me Finish? 3 years? Just in general, I don't like the precedent this pack potentially presents. Something I liked about the older packs is that they had an almost MTV quality to them. As to say, they weren't strictly for adults, but they weren't exactly for kids either. I appreciate them adding family-friendly filters so that way they could cater to kids as well as families, but otherwise, I liked how the older games would mention sex or drugs just casually without the need to dwell on it, by seemingly cutting back on prompts like that in the more recent games. To then just dump them all in this pack makes it seem like they're trying to create a clear divide between an M-rated Jackbox and the typical pack, and I don't think that's a good thing. If people didn't know better, they would probably think the newer packs are rated E, but they're not. They're rated T, which is the perfect rating because it has the power to appeal to all demographics. But the thing is, I think they absolutely could make a Jackbox that appeals to a strictly older demographic, but if they were going to do it, they needed to go all in. They needed to craft 3 games that were intertwined with their adult nature, instead of what happened, where they made 3 otherwise normal Jackbox games with sex prompts constantly being forced in. Make a survive the internet type game where you make up fake porno titles in its reviews for an up-and-coming adult website. Do a truth or dare type game where players are asked personal questions and then play some minigames for the dares. I'm just spitballing here, but the point I'm getting at is that in an M-rated pack, the core of these games should feel adult in nature, not just the prompts. And the reason the prompts in the 3 games we got feel so forced is because you could feasibly take them out without interfering with the game's core. Fakin and Drawful, we know for a fact since they're sequels to games that are not rated M, and Let Me Finish does have prompts that aren't dirty, and they're ironically some of the better prompts in the game. If making 3 games that are mostly detached from their dirty content is the route they truly wanted to take, then I think they would have been better off just making another T-rated pack, and then having $5 dirty mode DLC that made the games more raunchy. All this being said, I'm here to review what we got, not a what-if scenario. So as far as that's concerned, the Jackbox Naughty Pack gets a 3.2 out of 5. As critical as I've been, it's not like it's the worst thing the team's ever put out. Even if my friends and I weren't fans of Let Me Finish, Faking It All Night Long is a great update to the original, and Drawful is Drawful. When viewed as a normal Jackbox with an arbitrary age requirement, it's a half-decent pack. At over 20 bucks, the value proposition is a bit questionable, especially if you already own a version of Drawful. But if it it does go on sale, it might be worth picking up just for the updates to Fakin it. In fact, you all might be surprised to hear that I actually think more highly of the Naughty Pack than I do the Mega Picker. Yup, it's time to talk about this bad boy. I guess I should preface this by stating that the Mega Picker is free, and the idea itself is a good one. I mean, as they keep releasing more and more games, having a single application you could boot up the Switch between them I'd argue is almost a necessity at this point, especially if they're going to keep doing smaller packs and standalones like the Survey Scramble that was recently announced. That looks fantastic, by the way. When my friends and I are playing Jackbox off my Switch, it's kind of a pain to have to explain what's in every single pack so we can figure out what to play, let alone still needing to boot whichever pack up once we do decide on something. And I mean, just look at it. The presentation of the Mega Picker is top-notch. Every title card will gradually rotate as you move your mouse, and with this fantastic looking foil card aesthetic to boot. Each game has a brief description, you can mark games as favorites, and everything is categorized with player count, genre, and time duration. That's unfortunately where the compliments end, because the Mega Picker, at least in its current state, leaves a lot to be desired. The job of the Mega Picker, as I see it, should be two things: to help casual players less familiar with the franchise pick out what to play, and to make the streaming experience itself more seamless. Let's start with the first one. In fact, let's play this out. I'll be creating a hypothetical situation, but I don't think it's at all an unlikely one. So you got a group of 6 or more people, and they're all in the mood to play a short comedy game. Something funny, something quick. Right away, we're missing all these things. A player toggle is hidden away in the advanced settings for some reason. You would think that would be the most important feature, but no. The first thing on the hotbar is a toggle for Jackbox games you can play by yourself. Who the hell is playing Jackbox by themselves? I think establishing how many people are in your group is more important than finding out which games can be played alone. Time settings are the same deal, hidden away in the advanced filters, and these time estimations are way off. I love Drawful anime, but I don't know what world you're living in where it's only a 15-minute game. Ironically, Drawful 2 is listed as a 25-minute game despite it being quicker than Animate. Maybe if you have the smallest possible player count of 3 that Animate is 15 minutes, but a full group game is half an hour. In fact, that would actually be a great feature for the picker. On the top bar, you set how many people are in your group, and then from there, each game's time estimation would change based on how many people you said there were. There's unfortunately nothing like that though. And then there's the comedy thing. Am I crazy for thinking that people who want to play Jackbox might want to know which games are centered around their comedy? You know, your Quiplashes, your Survive the Internets, your Talking Points is... I guess writing games would be the closest category, but Blather, Split, and Push are not what I'd call comedy games. Actually, wait, why is Push in the writing category at all? Sure, there's a single test room where you type your answers, but Fakin it has a round where you type your answers, and that's not here. Comedy might seem like too vague a category, but 1, I can guarantee it's a descriptor that people less familiar with the franchise would appreciate, and 2, it's better a category be broad than it be so specific that there's only 2 games in it. Why is Puzzle a category? It only has 2 games and both of them are incredibly suspect. I can squint and maybe see how Bomb Corp could be considered a puzzle game, but how the hell is Devil's a puzzle game? In fact, all 3 of Devil's genres, strategy, puzzle, and role-playing, are all words that I would not use to describe Devils. To be fair, Devils isn't exactly the easiest game to categorize. Devils, Bomb Corp, Zeepeldome, and Dodo Re Mi are sort of in an awkward spot when trying to categorize them with other Jackbox games, but there's definitely similarities between the 4 of them. All of them are objective-based, as to say, all 4 actually have a lose condition where you can lose to the game, much like a traditional video game. Hell, you could even make a category called objectives. Or you could play on the fact they all more closely resemble traditional video games and call the category arcade. I don't know. In the context of Jackbox, making a puzzle category and then putting Devils in it is really bizarre. All this to say, the navigation and groupings could be better, and that hypothetical group of 6 looking for a quick comedy game to play won't be getting much help from the picker. For the rest of us who already know exactly what's in every pack, however, the bigger problem the Mega Picker has is the streaming experience. We all have our different setups, but the majority of players who buy Jackbox on a console are buying it there so it's easier to play in person, and the majority of players buying them through Steam are buying them to stream to friends. If you have your computer hooked up to a large-ass TV, then awesome, but let's not pretend that those are the circumstances for most people. If the Mega Picker is going to be a Steam exclusive, especially one of no controller support so the Steam Deck is kind of out, then the emphasis should be on providing players streaming to their friends a seamless experience. But what the Mega Picker does is it will open additional windows when you boot a game, which means on Discord, you can't just stream the Mega Picker and call it good. You'll need to manually change what application application you're streaming every time you switch games. If you're opening a Steam window to open the Mega Picker window to open the window of the game you're playing, then at that rate it almost defeats the purpose of the application. The Mega Picker does boot straight to the game without going through the pack menu, so I'll give it credit for that. But otherwise, I end up not using the Mega Picker at all in lieu of just booting the packs through Steam instead. I appreciate the team putting out a free application, I really do. The gesture itself is nice, but I really wish it was thought through a little more. It seems like something they only did because of the countless requests instead of doing it because they themselves wanted to make it. From that perspective, the implementation of the Mega Picker is less surprising, but I still hope they'll continue to improve it. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. This year, we did get a Fakin' sequel, and the Survey Scramble coming out later this month looks fantastic. I'll see you all when that drops, but until then, have a good one.